Recently I came across this beautiful work of art and got inspired. So today we are taking inspiration from the image on the left and creating some skull art with it. Jumping right in, grab the pen tool and create an outline of the skull. I put a guide down the middle because I'm going to create half the skull and then mirror it for the other half. Once the skull outline is done, hide it for now. Next, create the negative area. This will include the nose, eye sockets, and side gap between the upper and lower jaw. Unhide the skull and use the Shape Builder tool, shortcut Shift M, and holding Alt, click on the areas you want to punch out. Now, copy and paste that skull. Using the Scale tool, click on the further right edge of the skull, hold down Shift, click drag the skull to scale it closer to the right edge. This will create the 3D rotation look we want. I changed the color to easier identify the two pieces as well. At this point, I created the spectrum for our colors, 14 total, 7 for the left side and 7 for the right side. Next, let's select both pieces of the skull, and using the blend tool, click on one of the selections and then alt-click on the other. From the pop-up menu, choose specific steps and change the number to 5. After that, I expanded the blend and changed the colors from above. Then I mirrored the skull to its right edge to get perfect symmetry and chose the rest of the colors. For the teeth, I did something similar to above. I created the big tooth, then copy-pasted it and scaled it down. Then, using the blend tool, I created the steps between the teeth. I used the pen tool on the blend path to give the teeth a slight bend. I chose all the colors, mirrored, and chose the rest. For the bottom teeth, we will copy all the upper teeth, then go to Effect, Warp, Arch, and adjust the settings to get a nice lower bend. To give the teeth some separation from the skull, I made a copy of the teeth and merged them into one solid. Changed the color to white, lowered the opacity, and pasted it behind the teeth. The skull was looking a little flat, so I created some shapes for the shadow areas and used some gradients to give subtle depth. The negative areas weren't standing out as much as I wanted to, so I copied the two outer parts of the skull, merged them, and used the Shape Builder to create solids from them. Once I had those, I made copies of them, scaled them up, changed the opacity to 0, and used the blend tool to create some fades. At this point, I decided to make the artwork on a black background, so I changed the sockets to black and sent this bonehead off to Photoshop. By the way, before we start adding those spicy textures, this would be a great time for you to show your appreciation by liking the video. Shanks! Alright, in Photoshop, first we scaled the skull down. Next, I added a black texture for the background. Changed the skull blending mode to screen, added another texture paper on top of everything, changed that blending mode to linear dodge add, and played with the curves a little to darken it up. I wanted to add a glow to the skull, so I duplicated that layer, changed its blending mode to linear dodge add, added a Gaussian, however you pronounce that word, a G blur, and lowered its opacity. Now, let's add some glitchy blurs. I duplicated that blur layer and added a vertical motion blur. Our blurs got blurs, man. Then add a horizontal motion blur. Holding Alt, I clicked on the mask icon to mask the entire image. Now I used a rectangular marquee with a feather set to 4 to give some soft edges, and using a soft brush, I painted in random sections. I wanted to add some interest to the bottom, so I copied over our color spectrum from Illustrator, added a little liquefy movement, and sat that bitch down. I thought putting a copy of it on the top would be a good idea. It was not. I wanted more texture, so I added some scratch on top of everything. I changed it to pink, later on regretted that and changed it back to white. Life is full of those little regrets, man. The background needed some color, so let's copy the skull and add another big blur. Next, get an outline selection of the original skull by holding down Ctrl and clicking on the skull layer. Create a mask so that way we don't have too much color overlap, and change the blending mode to soft light. You guys like German horrorcore rap? I do. I grabbed some lyrics from the song Headstillstand by Zombies. It's good, trust me. Translated those lyrics to kanji and placed it down on the center of the skull. Why? Because it looks cool, that's why. The background still looked bland, so I added a new layer above the skull, painted in some color, changed the blending mode to screen, and lowered the opacity down to 70. I wanted to have more contrast in the background, so I rasterized the original layer and played with the curves a little. I thought the art needed more kanji, so bam, more kanji. I added a fade, duplicated the layers, added a blur, and changed the blending mode to linear dodge add. The center kanji needed some dimension, so I duplicated it. I double clicked on the layer to open the layer style window and unchecked the blue channel. I stretched the kanji a little bit and added some motion blur. At this point I realized the skull needed some more life to it, so I duplicated that layer, opened the layer style by double clicking on it, and left only the blue channel on. Using the arrows, I right-clicked a few times to move the skull to the right. I duplicated those steps for the red channel only and moved it to the left. We definitely need more texture. Added another image above the background layer with the blending mode set to overlay. Hey, if you're a Kill the Noise fan, give this video a like. I created a new layer and filled it with 50% gray, added a moderate amount of noise, and added a pixelate crystallized filter to make the noise a little more bulky. For the settings of the crystallized filter, let's go with 3. Oh, and don't forget to change the blending mode to overlay. Now let's get weird. I duplicated those red and blue channel layers from earlier and merged them. I went to liquify and made some funky swirls. Now we gotta change the blending mode. Can you guess which one we're going with? That's right, linear dodge add. Alt click the mask layer icon on the bottom and then use the marquee tool to paint in some horizontal fades. And at this point I realized the bottom rainbow spectrum needed some glow as well. So that's right, layer duplicate, linear dodge add. Now I wanted to add some glitch effect to the background. In Illustrator, I created a few blocks with different tones, then used the blend tool to create a fade. I copied this fade over and moved a few blocks around to give them both a unique look. When I copied that fade into Photoshop, I thought I could use it for an edge. However, after I added a stagger wind filter, we had a happy accident. The effect looked a lot cooler as a glitch, so I changed that blending mode to color dodge, duplicated it, moved it around, and finished it off with a horizontal blur reveal. At this point, the kanji needed a little more love, so I added a red channel effect the same way as we did for the skull. The finishing touch. Time to sharpen it up. I merged all the layers with a keyboard shortcut Control or Command Alt-Shift-E, adjusted the curves to give it a lot more contrast, and then went to Filter, Other High Pass, and changed the setting to a low 0.8 so only the edges were slightly visible, and then changed that blending mode to linear light. And that wraps up today's video, guys. Here's the final look at the inspiration and our final design. If you got any value out of this today, I would appreciate you giving the video a like. And even better, share it with another design buddy that you think would also find it useful.